Welcome to Three Questions With. I'm Hugo, publisher of the Latino News Network and your host. Three Questions With is a public affairs program elevating the voices and visibility of matters most important to the Hispanic-Latino community by speaking with community and industry thought leaders on the social determinants of health and democracy. The Pew Research Center finds that in 2020, there were about 6 million Afro-Latino adults in the United States. Afro-Latino identity is a distinct one with deep roots in colonial Latin America. The multiple dimensions of Latino identity reflect the long colonial history of Latin America during which mixing occurred among indigenous Americans, white Europeans, Asians, and enslaved people from Africa. Afro-Latinos' experiences are influenced by race, skin tone in ways distinct from those of other Hispanics, including struggling with their Black identity. Only 18% of Afro-Latinos said they were Black in a national study, compared to 39% who identified as white, while almost a quarter said their race was Hispanic, which is an ethnicity, not a race. The Hispanic community holds colorless ties, causing Afro-Latinos to feel that they must favor their Latino instead of their Black roots in order to avoid prejudice, a common occurrence if they have a lighter complexion. Michelle Bueno Vasquez is a Ph.D. candidate at Northwestern University studying political science and transnational Afro-Latino diaspora. She is our guest today. Michelle, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start the conversation by describing the work that you are leading as a methodologist and race scholar. You pursue research agendas to uplift historically marginalized communities, particularly those who experience marginalization within minority groups such as Afro-Latinos and Black women. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So my research centers the Afro-Latino experience, and I also do research on intersectionality and Black women in politics. And I have this interest in uplifting the voices, as you said, of folks that live in the margins of other groups that are minorities, because I think it's important for us within our communities to recognize the members that are at the edges. And those are the folks that need the most research, who need the most resources. And that's kind of my own experience that have led me to study this. So in terms of Afro-Latinos specifically, I'm interested in finding how Afro-Latinos feel about themselves, how they understand their identity. And on the flip side, also understanding the kind of difficulties that they face within U.S. politics, within our home country's politics, and within society, within our inherent anti-Blackness in the Latino community, within families who tell their kids, like, hay que mejorar la raza, or tienes pelo malo, which means like you have bad hair or like curly hair. And just bringing into question, like, wait a minute, I've been hearing this since I was young and I hear this around me. And now I realize that that's problematic. And just like looking inwards and seeing how we, whether you're Afro-Latino or not, can benefit our community and can actually acknowledge the ways in which we're complicit in discrimination of sometimes our own family members.
You know, we were talking before the program started about some of this is conditioning, right? And it's purposeful, beginning with the government. You work with the census, and we are forced to pick one or the other, and there's so much that we struggle with that. Tell us a little bit about that, about this conditioning of choosing one or the other, especially for people like us, that we can trace our roots to Spain, to indigenous people, to the African continent. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that in my research with the census, and I'm also a statistician, and what really interests me about statistics and in the social sciences, particularly when we're talking about race, is that we see the census as just official. So it's like whatever is on the census, that's what we think is real. Like anything that comes from either the government or like a hospital, or because hospital forms also ask you your race, or like a school, like we're like, this is legitimate and these are the categories that exist. So you might identify as like, you're like, oh yeah, some of my roots are Taino, but that's not an option here. Like I only have the race options, which are those big five. So we have white, we have Black, we have Asian American or Pacific Islander, you have Native American or Indigenous, and then you have like these other categories that are like other, like some other race. So a lot of Latinos end up choosing some other race because within that form, within the race questionnaire, you don't see Latino or Hispanic. You only see that as an additional question asking about ethnicity. So the problem with the census, and that comes out a little bit in my article that I wrote for the Washington Post, is that the census was created, first of all, this race question has evolved over time, and the way it's evolved was through mobilization by grassroots organizations, grassroots Latino and Hispanic organizations that within their leadership didn't have Afro-Latinos and did not have Afro-Latinos in mind when it came to adding the Hispanic category to the census. So this category within the census, and this is not it's absolutely not accidental. There's multiple years and so many people that review this form for every 10 years. This is a big deal. So you can interpret every word in the census as not an accident. So within the examples that they give for Hispanic, Latino or Hispanic, they provide Argentinian, Mexican, Spaniard, which counts as Hispanic or Latino. And then within the examples in the race category for Black or African American, they'll include, for example, Haitian. So it's already kind of internalizing us as Latinos that, okay, people who are from Spain are closer to us than people that are from Haiti. And they speak French in Haiti. The definition of Latino is someone that comes from Latin America who comes from a country that was colonized by the Portuguese, by the Spanish, or by the French. That includes Haiti, that includes Brazil. And a lot of times we essentialize what being Latino means as speaking Spanish. So we include Brazilians, for example, in Hispanic or Latino. These are not synonyms. They don't speak Spanish. They are not Hispanic, but they are Latino. And we share certain experiences in the United States as minorities that Brazilians share, that Haitians share. But then by not being, parsimonious with our words and parsimonious with what these definitions actually entail within the census, it's invisibilizing groups. It's taking those groups for granted in terms of numbers. So we see this is the Latino population, it's growing. We're a quarter of the US population. We're going to surpass white Americans by this much in this year. It's taking advantage of Afro-Latinos, indigenous Latinos, undocumented Latinos who fill out the census and are counted in numbers, but don't ever get or see the funding or get or see the policies or political mobilization or political candidates prioritizing their experiences, but taking advantage of them when it comes to numbers, when it comes to representation.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that a lot of times people get a little bit confused about. Hispanic and Latino, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. Hispanic has to do with language, so someone from Spain, where they speak Spanish, are Hispanic, and certainly in most of the countries in the South American continent, Central America. But Latino is about geography, so it's people who live in North America, Central America, South America. So you've got Brazilians that are Latino but not Hispanic, and then you have Spaniards that are Hispanic but not Latino, and important distinctions. I want to now go to the second subject, because a lot of times, because we're forced to pick one or the other, many Afro-Latinos end up choosing their Hispanic-Latino roots versus their Black roots because of some of that negativity associated with skin tone. A study by the State University of New York at Albany found that Latinos who identify themselves as Black have lower incomes, higher unemployment rates, higher poverty rates, less education, and fewer opportunities than those who identify themselves as white or other. You have said previously that the mobilization of Latino political organizations has encouraged many Afro-Latinos to identify themselves with Latinos instead of their Black roots in order to gain more funding from the government. Tell us about this tactical behavior that leads to minority movements essentialization.
Yeah, actually, minority movement essentialization is a terminology that I coined, and it's a theory by which I find that organizations that are Latino grassroots organizations, for example, or any minority rather, that's trying to gain some kind of political or economic attention from the larger sphere in the United States, will tend to essentialize the definition or the essence of that minority as its prototypical member. So we see that with, for example, BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, as centering Black men and not necessarily prioritizing Black women within the movement or queer Black people, for example. And then we also see that within the Latino group as creating this image of what Latino looks like. So this quintessential Latino in the eyes of the United States, in the eyes of, and this image that was given by those grassroots organizations that also were the ones who mobilized for the addition of that census question. This like quintessential Latino would be brown, probably from Mexico, most likely Democrat, most likely middle or lower income. And the issue with having this idea of this Latino prototype is that, again, it obfuscates the folks that live in the edges, so that live at the end of the spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, you have, again, indigenous Black Latinos who are completely erased from any kind of policy, any kind of representation when it comes to politics, or even when in the media. And that's the thing with race versus ethnicity versus culture. Race is a political category that influences how you're treated by the government, how you're treated by the system that you're in, and it's a category that's imposed onto you. You cannot really choose how you're seen racially in whatever system you are, in the US system, for example, whereas culture is something internal that a community defines for itself. So in the same way that a lot of white Latinos are walking down the street or driving and will not get stopped by, a police officer and treated the way, say, a Black Latino would be treated by a police officer, like a brown or mestizo Latino would be treated by a police officer. They can live with that privilege without having to do any kind of self-accountability of, wait a minute, what privileges do I have in my community and how am I being part of the problem?
Now, you've talked a lot about this being purposeful and using the government as an example.
Yeah.
What role does media play in perpetuating this, again, defining who and what a Latino Hispanic is?
Totally. So let me ask you this. What are the two biggest channels that someone who doesn't speak English, that only speaks Spanish, would watch?
Univision and Telemundo.
Perfect. I was going to say Univision and Telemundo. Now imagine, have you ever seen the news, Primer Impacto or anything? Sure. What do those people look like? Those people.
They're white. They're all white. Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of times when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and part of my past is as president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, we're very quick as an organization to ding white mainstream media for lack of diversity.
Correct.
But not as much as we should with Telemundo and Univision as an example in regards to equal representation of on-air and behind-the-scenes journalists. So absolutely. And only until recently, Univision has a main anchor with Calderon as an Afro-Latina who is representing. But we're talking about a drop in the bucket in comparison to the population of that particular newsroom.
Right, and we see, again, the news is one of those things that's akin to the government. This is the news. This is official. This is not subjective. There's no agenda here but informing us. And that brings into question, well, if the anchors are majority white, not even mestizo or brown. I'm talking about the essential Latino seen as brown, but even beyond that. Again, these are the other side of the spectrum. Jorge Ramos, I think, has blue eyes, very light-skinned white Latinos. And then if those are the anchors, what's going on in the producing? What's going on in the writing, in the newsroom? How are stories selected? How are stories told? And one research that I want to do for my dissertation is how these news channels may be reported on Black Lives Matter. And what kind of language are we using there? What kind of language is being told to my parents? My parents don't speak English. They watch Univision Telemundo, and taking kind of advantage of the fact that these are the channels that are available to Latinos who are new to the United States or who might be older and may not have access to more sources of media. And it's important to question, wait a minute, how are we conditioned to not seeing Black Latinos? It's not that we're not there. There's a lot of us, actually. Is that who is not inviting us into these rooms? Who is actually keeping us out? Who is keeping us out of their neighborhoods? So, absolutely important to question what the media is doing to do that, to indoctrinate.
Absolutely. Afro-Latinos are hiding in plain sight, so to speak,
Right.
when it comes to some of the media representations of the community, including in Spanish language TV. We've been talking to Michelle Bueno Vasquez, Ph.D. candidate at Northwestern University, studying political science and transnational Afro-Latino diaspora, about some of the challenges Afro-Latinos face due to the Westernized standards of Latin America and the United States. When we come back, we're going to learn more about your Dominican Republic, born and raised in South Florida. We're going to learn a little bit more about her upbringing and what drives the work that she leads.
I'm Kimberly Loftus. On the next edition of In the Money, we'll discuss college debt. Is college still worth the investment? And if so, how to manage it with my guests, Tanya Wittenfeld and Tish Griffin.
First, look at the costs, but also look at the career path that you want to take.
Join the conversation Thursday at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
We've been talking to Michelle Bueno Vasquez, Ph.D. candidate at Northwestern University, studying political science and transnational Afro-Latino diaspora. Let's talk a little bit more about you.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before we went to the break, you're from the Dominican Republic, and then you moved early on to South Florida. An experience that when you were 11 years old, that you described that was a culture shock, but also a racial shock. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in Santo Domingo with my family in the Dominican Republic, and then me and my parents moved to South Florida, like north of the Miami area when I was 11. And you're so right, culture shock is how I would describe it. So like one of the things I remember that just really like rocked my world was that frozen dinners. Like you can just find like there's just like frozen food and you can just heat it up at home. No apagones. There's always light. It was always like, you can turn on the AC all day. That's crazy. But in addition to those things, I just like, as a kid, you're just like, wow, this place is awesome. Even though I missed home, I was like, I can get used to this. The racial shock was very real because in the Dominican Republic, everyone's Dominican. Most people are Dominican. We Dominicans come in all shapes, colors, sizes, etc. And there is definitely racism. There's definitely colorism. Those things are real, but they're more of an insidious nature rather than an outright nature. Although now as an adult who's studying these things, I know that there are actually more outright racial discrimination in the Dominican Republic, similar to the United States. But yeah, as a child, I realized racism within the Latino community and as an Afro-Latina from other Latinos. So like, I thank all the white Latinos I went to school with in high school for that, for that realization, because that set me on the course to what I'm studying now. So I went to high school in Miami proper, in South Florida, in South Miami. And I went to an all-white, like a mostly white school, mostly all white. But the funny thing is that within that white group, the grand majority were white Latinas. I went to an all-girls school. So all these girls, most of these girls were of Cuban descent or other Latino descent, but again, basically white if you saw them walking down the street. And, I would hear horrific things, like horrific racism, and I would just make faces and be like, so like this one girl I remember telling me that her grandparents they just hate black people. It's like they're so racist. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I won't come over to your house anymore. Someone who I knew that well, that I've been to her house, and she's like, oh, not you. You're different. You speak Spanish. Like, you're not like them. And I'm like, what do you mean, not like them? Mm-hmm. If you didn't know me personally and you just saw me, you would group me with them. You wouldn't assume that I'm Latina. Even here in Chicago, I'll speak Spanish to, like in an establishment where I see that a server speaks Spanish. And sometimes people will ask me like, oh, what are you mixed with? And I'm like, what do you mean? And be like, yeah, you're Latina, but like black? And I'm like, well, yes, I'm black Latina, but both my parents are Dominican. Like both my parents are from the same place. And it's like this assumption, right, that like Latinos don't come in this color or in this shade. Or that like that cognitive dissonance that like I saw in high school that like, no, I like you and I don't like black people. So there has to be something about you that's different. And it's like, yeah, we share similar cultures, and that instead of trying to use that as an awareness of like, oh wow, I've been so prejudiced about Black people, about Black Latinos without knowing, you try to overcorrect that by being like, Black Latinos aren't Black. They're just another color of Latino. And it's just like, it doesn't make sense. It's just kind of what people tell themselves to continue showing some kind of disdain towards Black folks of whatever background. But yeah, that was the racial shock that I felt. That was high school.
And one of the things that you mentioned in one of the articles you wrote was when you were younger, almost praying to wake up a different shade. There's a lot of mental wellness issues that comes with this notion that we have to choose one or the other, that we're, in the case of Afro-Latinos, you're not Black enough to be accepted by the perhaps African-American community, and you're not Latino enough to be accepted by Hispanics, Latinos that come from a Spaniard lineage or wider. Can you share a little bit about that experience in regards to the importance of investing, not only in normalizing conversations like what we're having, but also the mental wellness that happens with regards to not being enough?
Yeah, absolutely. And growing up, what I shared there is I hated my hair texture when I was a child, and I thought it was too dark. And where did I learn those things? Like, it wasn't like an inherent thing. It's not that being lighter skinned is better. It's not that it's more attractive. It's the way that and this is in Dominican Republic, within our Latino community, we kind of uplift people who are lighter skinned. We say like, ay, qué bonito, salió rubio, or like, like, oh, azules, wow, like this kind of prioritizing these European aspects and kind of treating pejoratively the like darker skin or like more indigenous features, like having a certain type of nose or a certain type of hair texture or skin color. And like, who are we, like, what are we deeming as more preferable, like a better way to be? And so like growing up, that was something that I was faced with. And I remember my dad who's actually Black, he was the one who was encouraging, like, oh, stay out of the sun, and like, where did he learn that? It's like, I'm not demonizing my father or anyone who even holds these beliefs. It's just taking a break and thinking, oh, wait a minute, like, why do I feel this way about myself, perhaps, or why do I feel this way about others in my community?
As you've mentioned, we're conditioned to what is right and wrong, what's beautiful and not beautiful, has been defined by often the white establishment. And once you become self-aware, struggling with chipping away at those biases that we've been conditioned to believe as truth.
It's important to prioritize teaching our children early on, our Latino children, to embrace their background, their heritage, whatever it may be, and to acknowledge too, like, it's like, okay, these are the ways in which you're privileged, and these are the ways in which you might face difficulty later on in life because of this system that we're in, that we are actively fighting to fix and to make equitable. It doesn't behoove us or as a community or like the next generations to come for us to kind of continue this idea that all Latinos are the same, all Latinos are brown. Because what it does, it creates a sense of anxiety, this kind of like, where do I belong? Like, I have no one that will look out for me politically, no one that will look out for me socially. And as you said, like this, where do I fit in? Like, I'm not Black enough to be Black, even though, hello, because of where I'm from, because I also speak Spanish, because I perhaps don't speak the way that African Americans speak. But at the same time, not Latino enough to be Latino, because I turn on the TV, I want to watch a novela, the newest novela, and everyone's white. Like, it's just this idea of like, is there something wrong with me? Like, am I wrong? Should I just like make myself as small as possible so no one will see me, because apparently no one sees people that look like me? It's very much worth bringing into question like the kind of anxieties that this creates for people internally of any age. And I think there has been research shown that Afro-Latinos in higher education face a lot of discrimination from other Latinos, from other Latino students, or from the larger environment. And how that in higher education and college creates a lot of anxiety. So like our young people are struggling, especially again, those who have overcome the most to reach university level, like Afro-Latino youth, and then are struggling to find community once they're there, when that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, we have to unlearn what we have learned, and you're doing important work to chip away at some of those biases. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.
This week on Change Agents, we will meet some leaders who are working tirelessly to empower our youth through restorative justice advocacy, trainings, and practices.
So a lot of the infractions that kids are getting locked up for are things that are just kids being kids.
Join me Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV 19, stream us live on cantv.org, or watch us on the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
And now, la última palabra, the last word on Afro-Latino representation. Afro-Latinos are individuals of African descent who have roots in Latin America, the Caribbean, and other regions of the world with strong African influence. They make up a significant portion of the Latinx community, and their presence is vital in showcasing the diversity and richness of Latin American culture. Afro-Latino representation is a crucial aspect of diversity and inclusion in media, politics, and society as a whole. One of the main reasons why Afro-Latino representation is important is because it helps to combat stereotypes and misconceptions about what it means to be Latinx. For too long, the media has portrayed Latinx individuals as being predominantly white or mestizo, erasing the experiences and contributions of Afro-Latinos. By highlighting the stories and achievements of Afro-Latinos, we can challenge these narrow and harmful narratives and show that Latinidad is a diverse and multifaceted identity. Furthermore, Afro-Latino representation is important for empowering and uplifting members of this community. When Afro-Latinos see themselves reflected in the media, in politics, and in positions of power, it validates their experiences and identities. It sends a powerful message that their voices matter, that they deserve to be heard and seen. This representation can also inspire future generations of Afro-Latinos to embrace their heritage and pursue their dreams without feeling constrained by societal expectations or limitations. In addition to empowering individuals, Afro-Latino representation also plays a crucial role in promoting social justice and equity. By shining a spotlight on the struggles and triumphs of Afro-Latinos, we can raise awareness about issues such as racism, discrimination, and inequality that this community faces. This visibility can lead to greater advocacy and activism for social change, as well as policies that address the unique needs and challenges of Afro-Latinos. Ultimately, Afro-Latino representation is essential for building a more inclusive and equitable society. It allows for diverse voices and perspectives to be heard and valued, and it enriches our understanding of what it means to be Latinx. By amplifying the stories and experiences of Afro-Latinos, we can create a more just and inclusive world where everyone, regardless of their race or background, can thrive and succeed. And that does it for this edition of Three Questions With, a collaboration by Illinois Latino News and CAN TV. LNN is dedicated to best serving Hispanic Latinos with local multimedia news and information websites across the U.S., including Illinois Latino News, a statewide community-focused initiative. I invite you to look us up on our websites and chat with us via social media. Tell us what you think about the topics we talked about today, and please send me suggestions about what you think we should talk about in the future. Because at the Latino News Network, you're more than just our audience, you are our contributors. I'm Hugo. Thank you all for watching.